So the Office of the Chief Justice has now asked KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi to back up claims or give evidence of claims that some members of the Judiciary are themselves complicit in the crimes committed by this alleged syndicate. Mkhwanazi claims there's been collusion between the Judiciary and criminals. The Judiciary says that the claims run the risk of damaging public confidence in its independence as well as the integrity of the country's courts if they're not substantiated. Let's discuss this further with Mbekezeli Benjamin from Judges Matter. Mbekezeli, a very good evening to you. Good to have your time. So how damaging would these allegations be if indeed the inquiry that we're now heading to confirms that judges and magistrates were indeed involved in a syndicate doing the bidding of criminals?
Good evening, Mbekezeli, and good evening to the viewers. Mbekezeli, to be quite honest, what would be damaging is if these allegations are made, but they're not substantiated and they're just left to hang. And so that is the worst case scenario in the circumstances. What should ideally happen is that there should be a proper investigation into the allegations that some magistrates or judges in Gauteng are involved in criminal syndicates, that there should be an investigation that gets to the bottom of the allegations. And what we actually hope is that General Mkhwanazi would come forward with concrete evidence so that action is taken. What we hope that this Commission of Inquiry will do as a priority is to investigate those allegations against the Judiciary. Because, first of all, the Judiciary is a much smaller entity, so it's much easier to get to the bottom of things. And secondly, so that those allegations can be referred to the Magistrates Commission or the Judicial Service Commission, as the case may be. The longer that the allegations are left to linger, that is what will cause the damage.
And the Judiciary, much smaller than, for instance, the police service, etc. So even if it is, let's say, a handful of judges, how do the likes of Chief Justice Mandi Samaya then act to prevent that if indeed, once again, we do find actual cases of judges and magistrates involved in this collusion with criminals? How should the Constitutional Court Justice then lead a process perhaps to protect the judiciary of this country's integrity from being tainted overall?
Well, it's quite easy. The way to do it is to make sure that those who are implicated are dealt with, and they're dealt with swiftly. In fact, when you look at recent history, the Zondo Commission, there were two judicial officers that were named in the Zondo Commission. One is a judge, one is a magistrate. Both are undergoing very serious processes right now. One is at risk of impeachment as a judge. The other is on trial on allegations of corruption. And because they were specifically named in the Zondo Commission, action could be taken against them. And that is how you protect the judiciary. Because, like I say, if you leave the allegations to linger and that they're not dealt with, then it creates this cloud that we don't know whether it's one person or two people involved, or whether it's a bigger group of people. And so they need to be dealt with as quickly as possible. And in fact, in our research, what we did is we did an investigation into the Magistrates Commission and its processes for dealing with complaints against magistrates. And what we found is that when you look at the complaint system over a period of about 4 years, we looked at 230 complaints. Very, very few, less than 2% of them dealt with criminality, and less than 1% dealt with allegations of corruption, even though there's this perception that magistrates are corrupt or that they are acting improperly. And so it's important that these allegations are dealt with properly through a transparent and independent process, so that we can at least clear the air, knowing that we can trust the courts and we can trust the judiciary because these allegations are dealt with.
Where there are allegations of impropriety, corruption, etc., does the system allow for a speedy resolution, or at least a response to the allegations? In the case of Minister Mkhunu, for example, we now know that he's gone on this leave of absence. That may have been at his own request, according to some Sunday reports. But once we get to a point where we perhaps hear the names of judges who are said to have been involved with the syndicate, is the allegation alone enough for them to be placed on special leave, suspension, whatever the correct term may be?
Unfortunately not, Mbekezeli. The JSC Act makes it very clear that for a complaint against a judge, it has to be done on affidavit. So that's the first thing. It has to be done on affidavit. There must be facts and evidence to support that complaint. And only when that complaint is filed can there be action taken against the judge, whether it is suspension or any other form of action that is taken. Because the risk is that if you investigate judges based only on the say-so of one person, then we will not have a judiciary, because lots of people have daggers against lots of judges. And that's precisely the nature of the judiciary. It deals with very hardened criminals, and I'm sure many of them have some other allegations that may not turn out to be true. And that's why it's crucial that even in this instance, this Commission of Inquiry brings up solid evidence to support the allegations that have been made, so that the Judicial Service Commission can take the necessary action, including suspension, tribunals, and other concrete disciplinary action against those implicated.
So
but for now, it's just rumors.
And the challenge, Mbekezeli, the judiciary, faces, especially in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, is that ultimately it's been dragged into some of the many political scandals and controversies of the years, right or wrong, right? Sometimes without sufficient grounds to prove that there's been a bias, or a word that's entered the lexicon is the capture of the judiciary. So how then, given the onerous process of proving guilt or sufficient suspicion of wrongdoing, how then does it respond well enough to manage public perception? Because it's one thing for a court to rule, but you also are dealing with a situation where people's minds and opinions are often made up on a mere report or even a briefing.
But that's precisely why we can't operate only on rumors, Mbekezeli. There needs to be concrete evidence, and it's actually to deal with allegations against the judge, you simply need to bring up the evidence. Then the process will take its course. But if you're just making unsubstantiated rumors, then you're not helping anyone. You certainly are not helping the judiciary, and in fact you are doing a lot of damage to the judiciary, because until those allegations are dealt with, then that perception is reinforced in an unfair way. And which is why I was saying earlier, we did a deep down investigative research into complaints against magistrates, and the perception versus the reality are two different things, because there was very little evidence to support, at least in the formal complaints process, to support this perception against magistrates. Similarly now, the allegations that General Mkhwanazi has made are very serious. They need to be dealt with. They need to be substantiated. The only way to do it is if General Mkhwanazi steps forward and provides the evidence, or the Commission of Inquiry finds this evidence and it is dealt with by the authorities.
So just lastly, Mbekezeli, on the issue of the inquiry itself, we're expecting, let's say, a preliminary report at around the 3-month mark of its work, and then there'll be another check-in, another update given at the end of a 6-month period. Are the timelines at a very basic level, as laid out by the President in his address to the nation last night, are they realistic? Do they give it enough time to be able to take in fully the scope of what it may have to deal with here, when you consider that it's not just limited to the likes of Minister Mkhunu, General Shadrack Sibiya, etc., but it will cover possibly allegations against current and former officials in law enforcement and the judiciary?
Well, look, the only way that the 6 months can be maximized is if the investigation is focused and it is inquisitorial. A commission of inquiry should not be a trial. It should be an inquiry into the facts, and those facts should be handed over to the relevant authority to take concrete action. Unfortunately, what we've seen in recent times is commissions of inquiry have turned into trials in and of themselves, and that's what elongates them or drags them much longer than they should be. For example, what we are calling for is these allegations against judges and magistrates. Like I said, it's a very small group of people. And so in the first interim report, those should be dealt with, and they should be referred to the Judicial Service Commission or the Magistrates Commission, as the case may be. But it shouldn't be a full-blown trial.
Mbekezeli Benjamin, good to talk to you as always. Mbekezeli is with Judges Matter.